Hey, it's Marco from Craft Coffee Spot, and today we're going to be talking about the Breville Barista Express and the Breville Barista Pro. The Breville Barista Express may be one of the most popular semi-automatic machines in the market, but the Barista Pro is an upgraded, newer model. I've been testing both these machines for about 4 months, and I think you're going to know pretty clearly where I stand by the end of this. So to start, when you look at the look and feel and design of the machines, you can tell what's the newer model because the Barista Pro is a much more modern and futuristic look. It's got the rounded edges, the brushed stainless steel, and they went away with the analog pressure gauge and just put an LCD screen on the Barista Pro. But most of the design and workflow is about the same. They have integrated burr grinders and the same kind of dosing of the portafilter. Both machines have a compartment for your filter baskets right underneath the drip tray. And the only other small functional design changes are that the Barista Pro has a low water sensor. And also the Barista Pro now has an angled water spout. So if you're making an Americano, the hot water will go right into your cup versus the Barista Express where you can see the spout is just a little off the brew head. Now the biggest change on these two machines is what's on the inside. Breville put its latest thermojet heating system in the Barista Pro, which compares to the thermocoil on the Barista Express. These heating systems are both thermal blocks, which means they're a block of metal with piping that runs through it, and cold water comes in one side and comes out hot on the other side for your espresso. But the big difference in the design is the thermojet is a lot thinner. It's actually almost more of like a substrate material on metal with a very thin piping, and that makes the heat transfer a lot more efficient. And you can tell this because when you turn on the machines, the Breville Barista Pro starts in 3 seconds versus the Breville Barista Express, which takes about 30 to 45 seconds. Now, to me, that's not the biggest change. The biggest change is the temperature consistency that you get with the thermojet heating system. I have just found with pulling espresso shots on these for the last several months that I just tend to get a more smoother and balanced taste on the Barista Pro. It just tends to be more consistent time after time. Versus on the Barista Express, sometimes it'll be just as good as the Barista Pro, but more often than not, it can be a little hit or miss. I'll notice it starts out a little sour on the first shot, and the second shot can be a lot more bitter, and then back again. And that to me is just a sign of inconsistent temperature. Remember, you want consistency in your espresso, because that's really what matters. Consistent grind size, consistent pressure, and consistent temperature. And there's one other way that I think you can tell that the older thermocoil is just not as consistent. And that's because the machine tends to growl at you. The Barista Express will make this kind of rumbling noise. What that is, you'll notice steam coming out of the drip tray, and that is the thermocoil discharging hot water into the drip tray because it's just gotten too hot and it needs to run through water to cool off. And to me, that's a big sign that there actually is some temperature differences here on the two heating systems. And for me, that's a big point of the Barista Pro, that it just makes a better, more consistent espresso. Now, moving on to the steam wand, this is also where things have changed. So if you look at the Barista Express, it has a 1-hole tip on the metal steam wand. Meanwhile, the Barista Pro has a 4-hole tip. But to me, the bigger difference also comes from the thermojet, because when you turn on the steaming on the Barista Express and the Barista Pro, you'll notice the Barista Pro heats up a lot faster. So this should start heating up within about 3 seconds on the Barista Pro, maybe closer to 10, it'll start steaming. Meanwhile, I've turned on the Barista Express another 20 seconds earlier, and it's just starting up here. And so you can tell the thermojet just tends to have a much higher pressure. And you can tell when you're actually frothing milk because the Barista Pro takes about 45 seconds versus the Barista Express, which is more like a minute and a half. And if you think it's just a steam wand tip, you can actually change those steam wand tips. And that's something I did. I switched the 1-hole and the 4-hole and put the 1-hole on the Barista Pro. And actually, it didn't really change the times that much. It maybe changed it by about 10 seconds, but the Barista Pro was still noticeably faster. And so I think that just says that the thermojet does have a bigger difference here. Now, when you look at the grinders in the two machines, like I said earlier on, they're both the same conical stainless steel burr grinder. But the settings are different. when you're on the Barista Pro, you can actually dial in to about 30 settings versus about 16 settings on the Barista Express. Now that also is a pretty big deal. And why do I say that? Because you can really dial in your espresso the most easily by using grind size. Going finer or coarser will help you change the taste the most easily on these machines, or just about any espresso machine here. And so on the Barista Pro, I use settings about between 8 and 12, versus on the Barista Express, I was using about 2 to 4. Now that might not sound like that much, about 5 settings that I'm using on the Barista Pro versus 3 settings on the Barista Express. But said differently, you're getting 50% more range on the Barista Pro based on what I'm using, and that actually is a big deal. You can also pause the grind on the Barista Pro, which is nice if you want to just distribute the grounds halfway through. But frankly, it's not that big of a deal. It's really those grind settings that matter. Now, looking at the display, this is where I am a little bit more torn on which is better per se. And I say that because the LCD screen on the Barista Pro is a lot more new and modern, but personally, I think the analog pressure gauge looks pretty cool on the Barista Express, and I kind of like that it's there. But if you ask me which model has a more practical display, I think it's the Barista Pro hands down. When you look at that LCD, you could actually program a lot just by using the grind dial. So you could hit menu, and then just just turning the dial left and right actually allows you to customize the 1 cup, the 2 cup baskets. You can actually change the water temperature here, going up a few degrees or down a few degrees. And you can even go into different cleaning modes right here, whether it be a back flush or a descale. And it's just really easy to use, and it's all right there on a small dial. Now, meanwhile, the Breville Barista Express, you could actually do all those customizations that you can on the Barista Pro. It's just not as intuitive. I found myself opening up the instruction manual every couple of days to think about how do you change the water temperature again? How would you descale this machine again? And that just took a little bit more time, because the Barista Pro is just a lot more intuitive. Another big change in terms of workflow is that when you don't have this analog pressure gauge in the Barista Express, you do get a shot timer on the Barista Pro. You can see the time going up as you're pulling an espresso. Now, like I said earlier, I do like the analog pressure gauge. I think it's pretty cool, but I think the shot timer is a lot more practical. Because if you think about it, they're both telling you the same thing. If your pressure is really high in the Barista Express, your shot's probably taking a long time to ground really finely. But the difference is it's a lot easier to measure time on the Barista Pro than it is to measure pressure on the Barista Express, especially because if you look at that pressure gauge, you'll notice it's not even labeled. It's hard to actually tell if you're doing 9 bars or 12 bars or 8 bars, and you can't even control the pressure either. So you're really just looking at output, and controlling that time just makes the workflow a lot better over time as you're trying to get a better espresso. So like I said, as we're coming towards the end of this video, you can tell where I stand. I like the Breville Barista Pro. And to me, it really comes down to that thermojet heating system. It just makes a more consistent espresso, which is the most important thing here. It's a little bit easier to steam milk and faster to steam milk, and I find the display to be more practical. Now, if you already have the Breville Barista Express, should you upgrade? No, I would actually just hang on to your current model, which this is more than a good enough model and good for most home baristas, especially if you're starting out. But if you are just buying your first machine and you want something that's an all-in-one and easy-to-use model, I really recommend getting the Barista Pro. It's about $200 more expensive at the time of this filming, and I think that's well worth it for a better heating system. This is a model you can have for the next 5 years or longer, and it can be very easy to use. If you want to look up both of these items, you can find links in the description below. And also, if there's anything else you want to see tested on these machines, let me know in the comments, because I'm thinking of making some follow-up videos on these as well. And if you enjoyed watching this, hit like and subscribe to see those future videos.